Evening all on YouTube stream and play chess. Okay, hi all on YouTube stream and play chess. Okay, I've got a few interesting games to discuss from the Olympiad actually, so that's quite topical. I hope the board's okay. A bit biased by personal openings for this first game. It was a major clash. Levon Aronian 2805 playing against Maxime Vachier-Lagrave, who had recently won, done very well in tournaments and won a major tournament recently. So Lagrave is 2768, Levon Aronian is 2805, and it was a King's Indian defence, so that is of particular interest to me. So let's have a look what happened. I think it was a very interesting game. D4 from Levon Aronian. I hope the board's okay. Knight f6, and actually we'll put on a Kxh3. Actually, get ready with a Kxh3 here. Okay, so we got a Kxh3, c4, and it was a King's Indian. G6. Now here, instead of Knight c3, actually maybe this is anti-Grunfeld. Actually, white Levon Aronian played f3 here. I think this is an anti-Grunfeld system idea, and that's a bit of genius because actually I detest the Grunfeld defense and knowing anything about it. It's one of the openings I really detest knowing any theory about, and so I think I'm going to use this myself because the Simish King's Indian isn't so bad. I quite enjoyed always playing the Simish King's Indian. You know, here d5 is quite discouraged, I think, because white gets in this e4 without having any structural damage. This looks like quite a pleasant position. Yeah, bishop g7 was played, and we get into a King's Indian now. e4, d6, knight c3. After castles, bishop e3. And this looks like quite a comfortable idea. You know, queen d2 sometimes. Get rid of these bishops sometimes. Knight c6. Putting pressure on d4, knight ge2, and now we see standard kind of queenside counterplay plan from black, a6. So black's often playing like this and like this later. Queen d2, rook b8, so that b5, trying to get some counterplay on the queen side. Now white doesn't castle queenside. White plays rook c1, trying to discourage black from b5. So here b5 doesn't look at all palatable. Let's have a quick check. I think taking, okay, let's see. Well, here, yeah, it's just nice for white. Knight takes b5. It's to discourage that. I don't think black's going to have anything. So bishop d7, b3. Sorry, not b3, d5, knight e5, and the knight's hitting c4, so knight g3 protects c4. The problem with the knight, it's not that safe there. If white ever gets in h3, then f4 is a very serious threat for that knight. It hasn't got a retreat square here, so bear this in mind. We see rook e8, h3, as though f4 coming in next to kick that knight. Okay, and this is a surprising turn of events. Maybe this is home preparation or something. Black plays b5, and white just reinforces that c4 pawn with b3. So still has this idea potentially of f4 now to win the knight. So that would seem to be a dangerous threat. Black actually here doesn't make way for his knight. You might think, well, can he give the square d7 to the knight? Is that terrible? Probably is terrible, actually, really terrible, because c takes and then losing b5 isn't too good either. This is no compensation. Also, there's pressure on c7, so that's no good. It's not palatable. So we see actually h5. I believe this is all preparation, though, the way the game went. Very interesting play from black. So provoking this f4 to win the knight. the knight now sacrifices itself with knight takes c4. So very interesting knight sack indeed, I thought. Now one point is you see that rook is ready for e6 down here to put pressure on e4, and actually you see this pawn as well has a relevance to e4 in that it can chase the knight from g3. So it seems black's play is designed against the e4 pawn, because also potentially after takes there's b4 to knock out this guy. So both these guys are going to be attacked by b4 and h4 respectively here to try and knock out e4 control. And that's an interesting basis, I think, for this knight sack. Very, very interesting position. It makes the position kind of tricky to play. So we see b takes c4, h4 kicking this knight, and already if the knight retreats, this is, I think, bad news for white. b4 here isn't just okay for black, it's actually very, very good for black, this position. The engine really actually kind of likes black here. You can see that e4 will drop like this, and this is just bad news. Look at that huge bishop now. Queen c2 for example, or queen d3. If queen c2, apparently bishop f5 is even more powerful than queen d3. So say like this, e5, and this is looking just very, very dangerous. Now if d takes here, rook takes, you see that there's huge pressure on white's position, and this kind of be a dream position for black. All this congestion, total dream position for black, fully justifying the piece sacrifice. Be very, very difficult for white to untangle. Just as one example, knight f2, then check is pretty nasty. Okay, so white actually in this critical position has to play accurately and finds e5. So that gives the e4 square for the knight if given a chance. Black plays d takes e5 here. And now we have f takes e5 hitting the knight in return. Now this transaction here, let's have a quick look. Well, it's what's played. H takes g3 is played. Pardon me. Now, what if black doesn't play hg? Let's just see. If knight h7 as a new variation, then just knight here, and white's doing fantastically well. This is much better than anything we've seen before. There's no tangling of pieces or anything. This just looks like very pleasant stuff for white. So black is committed now after this e5, it seems, to play well, to play d takes e5, f takes, and here to play h takes g3, e takes, and we have a very interesting position after e takes f. Again, a piece down for black. So the three minor pieces, but it's a really interesting play here after queen e7. Knight's on the retreat, knight d1, and now another pawn, b takes c4. I don't think white can dare take on c4 here. There doesn't seem to be there enough time, but let's have a look. Bishop takes c4. Okay, there's apparently a very strong move in this position, or two strong moves, both designed against the e3 bishop. What would you play here as black if anyone's awake? If this had been played, bishop takes c4, should we do a quick test? What would you consider as black? What would you play here as black in this position? If I give you 20 seconds, I'm sipping tea, so 20 seconds here, what would you play as black? Okay, so Timbra observing, thanks Timbra. I think you've mentioned bishop h6. Anyone on YouTube stream? Anyone want to say anything there? Not yet. Bishop h6 has been mentioned by the turtle as well. Okay, a few people mentioning bishop h6. Yeah, apparently this is very, very good. If white tries to defend like this, this doesn't help actually. Queen e4, and we're on g2. This is looking silly. Bishop takes e3 here, and in this position, rook b2 is crushing. That's too sensitive. We're just it's absolutely murderous. Okay, so etc. So the king can't stay in the center. This pawn cannot be taken on c4. Also, some points for bishop a4. It does the same thing actually, kind of thing from the other side of the board. So white, you know, if white's there having to do that now, if he castles, if white castles, then bishop takes d1, and then e3's loose. So if white tries king e2 here, I think this is even worse. Queen e4 is again very, very powerful. So okay, so white castled here, so a piece up, and it seems technically this might be okay for white technically. Now bishop a4 is still played. Okay, so looking at bishop takes and then taking here, and this next move has been mentioned as a bit dubious on one side. White maybe possibly this was a slight slip up here. What would you play as white in this position? It actually looks quite clever in its own right, the move played, but maybe there's an even stronger move which could cast doubt on black's dynamic piece sacrifice. So what would you play here as white if you had the white pieces? What would you consider playing here? Anybody? Hope the stream's still working. So very interesting decision with the knight attacked here. It seems okay. Let's have a look at what was played. Bishop f4 was actually played. So how cunning is this? Now black here played g5 actually. So really interesting turn of events. If queen takes e2. Then after queen takes, rook takes, there's knight c3, forking. And say here, then this can't be allowed. So knight takes, rook takes c4. And white is the exchange up here. And potentially now with this passed d pawn. And that should be quite good for white. So that looks to be what Levon maybe saw. But interestingly, it has been mentioned in this position, rook f3. The engine seems to like rook f3 here. Does it really hold the fort? I'm not entirely sure how this can be a problem, actually. If anyone knows how this can be a problem, it seems maybe the engines are usually right tactically about things. I don't see how black justifies the piece here. He can try f5 for maybe taking and then rook b2 if white's not careful. So say bishop takes. This still, you know, it seems as though this looks good actually. Black's compensation seems a bit on the nebulous side. So I'm not really sure. If anyone knows what's been mentioned about Rook F3, please can you let me know. It looks as though this calm move might actually be the best move, and also of course threatening this pawn as well, which you'd think White would want to get rid of at some point. So we have a strange turn of events with bishop f4 instead, and g5 now. G5. Now bishop takes g3, and now we have this queen takes e2, queen takes, rook takes, knight c3. So the idea here, but with this position now, even better than this one is now rook e3, hitting the bishop on g3. White takes on c7, rook b7. It's chaotic, really. It's what is going on here? What on earth happens in this position? White's kind of given back the piece, and what is the situation here? Well, the situation seems to be that this d pawn's dangerous, and in fact now knight b6, that d pawn is immune because of knight takes c4, forking both rooks. So White's emerging here a pawn up. Rook takes c4 is played here. Again, if rook takes d6, I think there's a punishment with that. Check. If here, knight c4. So White's emerged out of all this complexity a pawn up. So we see rook e6, d7. Now this knight's immune because I think rook c8 is playable. If rook takes here, rook c8. And if rook b8 there, then just taking and rook c1. And this pawn is justifying itself to be better than the piece. So that's winning for White in this position. So actually here, Black can't take the knight. f5 is played. A very interesting idea. So f5, if this is taken, then we can just take the knight. This, I don't think this works anymore because like this takes here. There's bishop d4 check. Okay, so after f5, rook b1 is played, holding that knight on b6. Rook d6, and the game continues like this. Okay, we get this rook and pawn ending, which is going to be a draw like this eventually. I think it's a technical draw, and here they drew. I thought the opening was interesting, that's why I wanted to show this game. Just the whole concept was interesting, but maybe, you know, maybe it wasn't that sound. This looks as though it was like some sort of preparation, but was it entirely sound, this position? The big question about this game is this position. Is rook f3 really not just material up for White without too much difficulty? So anyway, let's go on to another game. Another Lagrave game actually, and another King's Engine. So this is also quite interesting to me. Lagrave playing White now against the King's Engine, against Shakhriar Mamadaryov. So knight f3, knight f6. We get actually a fianchetto King's Engine defense, and I'm a bit wary about this. I like to look at these fianchetto variations in particular from Master Games recently, and this is an interesting plan now. Knight bd7. So I think it's one of the more standard moves actually. If we checked live book here, Well, it's still very, very popular, knight Bd7, but also knight c6 is popular. Okay, so we have this fairly standard moves. Black often plays c6, but in this is another popular idea to release that central tension, putting pressure on e4. Now this a6 is interesting instead of knight c5. So a6, and I kind of felt for black having good counterplay here in this position. White actually seems to be not doing that well in this position. He plays rook e1. Okay, and now black actually plays rook b8, and clearly the idea is not an immediate b5 or anything, because knight c6 splat and the queen would be trapped. So the idea is revealed that first black in this position now after rook b1 attacks c4. Okay, the bishop comes back, and now we see c5. Quite a committal decision, weakening d5, but very active piece play after knight c2 b5, backward pawn as well. But I think this is very good looking for black. I don't know what you guys think about this position right here. If I asked you to you know, evaluate this for black, what do you think about this position? Let me clarify it a bit. White takes on b5 now and fixes b5. So we have this position where black has conceded the d4 square. So we've not just got this concession of d4, we've got a backward pawn here as well. Do you think, what would you prefer, white or black here? If I gave you that question, do you prefer white or black in this position? Is this a plan you would have used with the black pieces? Out of interest. What are the pros and cons? Black's also marked out this d3 square. This represents this kind of space advantage, but on the other side of the coin, there are potentially weak pawns to attack, like b5. If b5 drops, then c4 is going to likely drop soon after. Franklin Gomez, you mentioned black. Anyone on Play Chess? What do you reckon? I dislike both colours. School 202, 2012. Okay. So let's see what happens from this position. Remember, this is a fight of the heavyweights. Lagrave 2768 against Mamedarov, who's also around that rating. So this is, you know, the heavyweights battle, really. We see knight d4. Okay, is white actually threatening anything? Yes, this pawn. And that's ignored kind of with d5, creating some pressure on e4. So if knight takes b5 here, then black might even be able to play now d4 apparently. Wow. Do you know why black can play d4 here? If I play knight takes d4, what would you play with black in this position? So if I give you 20 seconds here, black to play here, what would you play with black? Any ideas? Okay, school 12 2012, yeah, well done. Anyone on stream? So black's play here, hopefully you've caught up. So this is why knight takes b5 is impossible. I'm about to show you, unless someone's going to mention something soon. Little trick, little forcing move trick, got to be wary of. Has it been 20 seconds yet? Black to play. What would you play with black? Oh, it's quite some time. All right, there's some comments coming in. Okay, so queen takes d4, forcing move. So it takes knight f3 with just one apiece. So knight takes b5 is not possible. So we see instead, actually black now after d5 is actually doing very well. Now if knight takes d5, then this is not very nice either. So we're threatening now, queen takes d4 I think, or other things. We might be threatening queen takes d4 if it wasn't for this rook on e8. Apparently other things are being threatened here with more importance, like this and this. But this is unpleasant for white. So say knight c2 could take here and bishop f5. You see what a beautiful position. White's just in a very horrendous state here. So black's kind of liberated all his pieces here. Look at these bishops blasting. So bishop g5 was played by Maxime Lagrave. He's in very, very serious trouble at move 18 with the white pieces here. D takes e4, knight takes e4, bishop b7 is played, bishop g2, and now black plays bishop takes e4, and white plays rook takes e4. We have queen b6, now threatening knight takes e4, putting pressure on the centre. White gives up the bishop, queen e2, creating that pin, rook e7. Black is still better. He's got this very nice space advantage. Knight c2, rook d8. Look at that d3 square. Rook e1. And in fact, rook d7 now. The rooks are very, very nice. Knight e3. King g7 is played. White tries to contest that d file. Knight d3, nice knight on d3. a4. Black exchanges on e4 and plays rook d4 now, hitting the bishop. But allowing, it seems this might be a little bit controversial because it's a protected pass pawn. A forcing move to create a protected pass pawn. You might think it's really dangerous. So the queen moves, and now another seemingly really dangerous move, queen g4. White is now threatening knight f5 check to win the queen. And what is going on here? If black moves the king like this, say, then check, and then we go into this position again. And what does black do? You know, king g8, we just have the check. So funny enough, in this position after queen g4, no, this is funny. This is actually quite funny. Sorry, I gave me a giggle. I just haven't seen anything like it. What does black play here to avoid the draw? There's a very serious drawing threat. This constitutes a serious drawing opportunity for white. Now Mamedorov, you know, doesn't want a draw. He goes for wins. What would you play here with black? If I give you 20 seconds, starting from now, I don't think anyone will guess it. To be honest. Basically, no one's programmed to get this next move in our mindset for chess. No one's in their right mind would, I think, consider the move that was played. So black to play here. This is the key threat. So what does black do to carry on playing for a win here? Oh, by the way, if you want to play chess, please move away from the score sheet, and I hope you haven't seen the game before. Actually, there's another move which is not played, which is also perfectly okay as well. He didn't need to do this. It seems a bit radical. It's quite amusing though. It's radical, but there is another move which he could have done. Mamtaryov as black. Okay, so now this move could have been played apparently. Actually, you know, it hits the queen. So if knight f5 check, it doesn't matter actually. King f8. Apparently this is okay for black. This position here, but h5 wasn't played. Actually, we have this ridiculous looking king h6. Mind you, you know, king h6, right, isn't so crazy when you consider black's got the dark square bishop, white hasn't got the dark square bishop. It takes care of the dark squares. The king is on a dark square here. The knight's covering f4. Things are covered here. And we're still left with this horrendous pin, potentially. So a tricky position for white. Knight c2 is played. And now tactically, black plays a tactic. Knight takes f2, hitting the queen and the rook. Rook takes d4. And black keeps the queen attacked with bishop takes d4, protecting the knight. We have check, king g7. And yeah, it looks a strange position here. Looks dangerous, this discovery checks, but actually the queen's on here, the knight's on there. White plays bishop takes g6, so threatening queen takes next, as well as queen takes h7. We see knight g4 check interfering. King f1. H takes g. I know it's crazy. Knight takes d4. Queen takes d4. And we have this ending where this outside pass pawn you'd think might be in white's favour. But actually black's got this dangerous c pawn here. So after check here, this is actually better for black. The game continued like this. Check, queen c3. Because now there's this queen a1 check to pick up the pawn. If that goes up, queen a1 check will pick up that pawn. Queen a2, trying to get in this here. Check. c3 though, c3. This one versus that one. And this is not too good, I think. If a7 now, apparently black is winning, like so. Queen d2 check. So we take here. This one queens. This one queens. And black is 2 pawns up. Pardon me. So let's go back. So after c3 it's tricky. White plays queen a1. Not a7, but now check, 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 and here, okay, the pawn's pinned, but black just plays king h7. So now threatening c2, and this is just too fast. White resigns here. So I thought that was a very entertaining King's Engine game, and very important, you know, idea here for King's Engine players against this horrible fianchetto line is expressed actually here, that black with a6 has got this you know, funny plan in mind, which I think happened actually in at least 1 or 2 Bronstein games or more. But I think Bronstein played the King's Engine a bit like this. So I thought that was great. You know, that was great. The whole game has a beauty to it. Dynamic, powerful stuff. Of course, you know, White's tactically asking for things along the way, weakening these squares. That helped things along. But it seems, you know, you can have a backward pawn here. You can have a weak b5 pawn. Is it exploitable? Not really. It's too much dynamic play we saw in this position. Too much dynamic play for black here after d5. That's great stuff. So let's go on to another game. Oh, now this is a bit of a crazy game of the tournament so far that I'd like to go over. Probably not that much in detail, but let's have a bash. So Topalov is a very, very exciting player. 2772, not too bad a rating either. So Pons 2698 is not such a bad opponent. So this is in round 3. So d4 from Topalov, and we see f5, the Dutch defence. So of course we've got a very exciting game here. So c4, knight f6, knight c3, e6, and potentially, I guess, bishop b4 might be attractive, with a kind of souped up Nimzo-Indian defence with a quick f5 being played. So White stops that pin with a3, and Black now switches this bishop to this diagonal, g6. So bishop g7. Has Black created this dark square, some dark square weaknesses? Well, you know, maybe. d6, bishop e2, h6, this h3, this bishop's going to be a pain on this diagonal. g5, it tucks itself in comfortably for the right. So knight bd7, queen c2, and already after queen c2, White actually threatens a few things here with queen c2. Potentially c5 is useful to dent this pawn chain, but also g4 is potentially useful as well, just to wrench open this diagonal and maybe castle queenside. So Black actually played b6, and we see rook d1. Okay, which discourages, I think, c5 here. If c5, well, actually we can always take here, it's not even a problem. So it looks like a useful move, discouraging Black from doing something. So king h8, b4, bishop b7. Now d5, which seems to provoke e5 here. But this pawn is not on in this position. If queen takes f5, then knight takes d5, hitting the queen, is not very good at all. If the queen goes back, we can take here and play e4. And this isn't very nice. So that isn't very nice at all. So the queen can't take the pawn at the moment. So Topalov plays knight d2. And now we get c6. So Black's opening up his bishop, seems quite logical, but with c6 he's weakening d6 a bit, and this bishop is feeding potentially on this pawn chain. If that pawn chain can be undermined at d6, e5 will be weaker. White takes that and now castles. Again, if we look at queen takes f5 here, this just looks a very, very bad idea. Actually, bishop takes g2 and knight e4. And this, again, is not very nice for White. So White's castled. But checking this again now, after rook c8, this has to be checked again. And you might think, again, well, it's pointless looking at this because of knight e4. Funny enough, it was actually, believe it or not, taken here. Funny enough. So we've got a loose knight. Yeah, knight e4's played. Is this a blunder? Knight e4. Can you guess what white played in this position? While I go and cough. So think about this position for the next 20 seconds. So what do you think about this position for white? Okay. It does seem to be a sort of positional queen sacrifice. There's not too many in the tournament so far that have happened, but it does seem to be a positional queen sacrifice. So white now played queen takes f8 check. So he's picking up a rook and a knight. But he's also unleashing this pressure on d6. And this structure here in the centre is quite fragile. This central pawn island, look at these islands. There's one there. There's one here. Can I do that different colour? Yeah, so they're all three different colours. That central pawn island, if d6 is knocked out, then this bishop is going to be fantastic to take on e5 later. So black's three pawn islands are a bit vulnerable. White's only got two pawn islands. They're quite solid. And he's got the bishop pair as well. So it's a very, very interesting position. And the engine suggests, actually, white is up by almost 1.5 pawns. 1.43. This is Stockfish 5. Evaluates this as better for white. So we see queen c7 and white playing now rook d2. So is he just going to double basically on d6? King g7, rook fd1. So d6 is dropping. Knight takes d6 was played. I mean, apparently even rook takes d6 is playable. But let's stick with the simple knight takes d6. So that weakens e5 now. Bishop takes, rook takes. And this is very unpleasant. Queen e7. White now plays bishop g3. And basically, you know, b5 is potentially useful, apparently. From a scientific angle, actually, it's sort of bishop g3. Let's just have a look at what the engine thinks with b5. Here, rook takes and rook d5. So we're actually threatening now bishop takes e5 to skewer the queen. And apparently this would be great for white already. Look at white's bishop pair and that f6 square. It's pretty nasty stuff which could have happened if white was able to play this accurately. It's just a total disaster for black. This just looks very unpleasant. Black's getting pretty squashed here. But that wasn't the way it was played, though, with b5. But that just shows, you know, by force, white can really force things here and win e5. Bishop g3, though, was played. Bishop did drop back. We do get a similar idea, though. Now, this knight is taken off. Queen takes, knight e4. So here, if queen e6, then bishop g4, and we're skewing here. So this is also unpleasant. If queen e7, then knight d6 hits the rook and threatens knight f5 check. So the queen actually went to g6, offering e5. Now we see knight d6, taking time to munch, hitting the rook moves. So this is dropping off. Check. Rook f8. Now here, rook f8, I think is offering some interesting stuff. If bishop takes e5 check, apparently this position is a little bit tricky for some reason. Let's see why. If the bishop moves back, bishop c6, and there might be something naughty going on here. Rook d1, queen c2, and you know we've got pressure here. So white actually carefully in this position he still didn't take on e5. He played c5 here, and now black played bishop b3, hitting the rook. If bishop c6, then taking now is a lot better than before, because actually the point of c5 is that c4 square. There's actually bishop c4 here. Wow, this is a fantastic idea. This c5 stops all the counterplay. So if taking check, win the queen. That is Topalov, powerful. You wouldn't have thought c5 is so useful here, but yeah, this c4 square is released. So bishop b3 is played. Rook takes e5 under much better circumstances than we've seen before. Much better circumstances. So queen c2, bishop f3. And now white is threatening great coordination here after the check. So black sacks the exchange, is a bit desperate. B takes c5, bishop a4, trying to stop the pawn. Check, c6, still possible here. If queen takes, then there's knight e7 check. And if bishop takes, then there's knight d4 with rook e6 check next. So that would be horrible. So the pawn's left. h5, threatening h4. White stops that with soon. Well, he first kicks the queen and protects this again. Queen c4, and now stops this h4 by playing h4 himself. G takes, bishop takes, and we see now black's counterplay is quite minimal. This is a runaway pawn here. After a5, check, check, c7, and black is actually defenseless here, virtually, against just check and rook c6 to queen the pawn. Black actually resigned here. As an example, say black plays bishop b5, then I think this will do, check and rook c6. This is just winning, so we just queen that pawn. The black queen is helpless in this position, so I think that was a fantastic position exchange sack, but maybe even more fantastic, coming to think about it, is the precision after here. I mean, who wouldn't be tempted to take on e5 here? We saw that that variation. Sorry, in this position, just bishop takes e5 seems so tempting, but you know, apparently this would have been quite tricky here. Actually, I think there's actually an important resource. Rook takes f2 as well. So by keeping the bishop, on here, protecting f2 and just opening up c4, it was very, very clever stuff, I thought, from Topalov. So that's amazing how he can do this. The implementation after the positional queen sacrifice was amazing. This c5, amazing stuff. I mean, okay, yeah, it's just impressive, I think. So let's have a look at another game. So let's go on to Magnus Carlsen now. So one of the Magnus Carlsen games against Nikola Jukic. So this is in round 3. So the opponent dared to play against Magnus's e4. Magnus Carlsen playing white. The opponent dared to play the centre counter, which was condemned by Nc3 for wasting a lot of time. So e takes d5, queen takes, knight c3, and the queen drops back. d4, knight f6. Knight f3 from Magnus Carlsen. This is pinned. h3, that's taken. Queen takes, looking at b7. c6, queen goes here. So white's got the bishop pair out of the opening, a small advantage. And actually here fianchetto's this bishop. Okay, both sides castle. a3, queen c7, rook d1. So white's got a small advantage. Rook ad8, b3. Not seemingly minding about e5. I think I saw a comment here, you know, what is Magnus Carlsen doing allowing this e5? I don't think it's that critical, but it does seem to improve black's pieces. But a rook fe8, as though e5 is coming next. Bishop b2. a6 now is played. Knight e2, and now finally this e5. So it seems as though it has black kind of equalised here. White has to play carefully to keep an advantage. Magnus plays c4, and he's actually threatening c5 maybe, and then b4 with a kind of bind. Black takes on d4. I wonder if this chat's still working, by the way. So e takes d4, knight takes d4. The advantage isn't so great from an engine perspective here. It's actually the advantage at move 18 here is down to 0.08. So not much of an advantage at all, apparently, in theory. Bishop e5. Now we see queen c2, c5. And here I noticed something on Reddit. Someone pointed out a video on Reddit where Magnus was commenting about this game and said, I think they asked him, how does he get small advantages to win? And he says sometimes, you know, in certain positions you need absolute precision to be able to even keep the advantage. And he talked about this position and about the temptation to play knight f5. But this is ruled out, I think. If knight f5, I think he mentioned this line with g6, and how here, knight e3, I think bishop takes g3, and you see that this loose knight, that wouldn't be much of an advantage for white at all, apparently. Although the engine actually doesn't think this is too bad for white. If we look at this particular position, that's queen f2. We've got weakened dark squares, so maybe it's not the end of the story. But I think he rejected knight f5. He mentioned something like this for rejecting knight f5. These tactical considerations after g6. It's interesting, but he now plays actually knight f3 here. To be honest, knight f5 is actually the engine move. Actually, this is quite funny. The engine move is actually knight f5, going into what he thought wasn't so good. So if we follow this through, let's follow this through for a laugh. Yeah, queen f2, rook e6, rook e1. I know black's compromised the dark squares. So if rook e8 takes rook f1. We've got pressure on f6. Is this enough to win? I mean, it looks actually, now it looks about equal again. The evaluation is switching to about equal after knight e5. It's like, it's about 0. It's nothing. It's nothing, this position. So the way Magnus has played it, he has actually maintained more tension by playing knight f3. But the engines think this is nothing, this position. But there's more pieces on the board. And significantly, actually, after this, Magnus mentioned, well, the king hasn't got g7. The queen's on a nice location. It's actually supporting b4 as well. So knight f8. And the knight can still head for f5 now. Knight h4, heading for f5 under safer circumstances. Knight g6, knight f5. And here, white does seem to have now established a small advantage. The engine agrees. This is a small advantage, this position, actually. We're talking about 0.30. The queen is nicely placed. The knight is nicely placed. There's quite a bit of tension. The bishop's quite good on the diagonal. And b4 threatens to coordinate the queen and bishop, potentially, on b7. So he has got his small advantage. His opponent's, I think, a grandmaster, Nikola Jukic, okay, 2521. So knight e7 is played. The knight comes back now to e3 under much safer circumstances. With b4 on the cards, you know, to coordinate against b7 soon. b6, b4. These light squares seem quite vulnerable. Knight c6, as though d4 is potentially useful. Rook takes, rook takes. Rook b1. So the question is here, does knight d4 actually do anything? Knight d4, if knight d4 was played, it wasn't played. But if it was played, I think taking, and we've got knight d5, and white apparently is doing very well here. So black took now on b4. This might actually, it might have actually been better to have played knight d4 or rook b8 apparently. This looks to be increasing white's advantage slightly now after a takes b4. Knight e5. So c4 is vulnerable, it's protected. Inviting rook d3, that's actually played. And the queen now just drops back to a1, looking at a6. If knight takes c4, there's another problem here tactically in bishop f1 in this position now. So h5 is played, trying to drum up some counterplay maybe, just letting a6 go. If black tries to defend a6, let's give, I mean, how does black actually defend a6 here though? It doesn't seem possible. It's a bit overloaded. The queen's on e5. You can't do this without dropping e5. So black tried h5. It's already a little bit desperate, isn't it? h5. So he drops that pawn. h4, g4. This knight sack is just not working. The knight's on g4. I don't think this knight sack is working. It doesn't do anything. I would imagine this knight sack is just a quick check. Would just be here, bishop, anything, check. It's not doing anything. So we see rook d2, at least trying to put some pressure on f2. And now this white's advantage increases massively now with this logical sacrifice which I mentioned on a video earlier today. So white to play a very logical temporary kind of sacrifice for a huge advantage. Can you guess what white played in this position? If I give you 20 seconds starting from now. This is so Magnus Carlsen against a grandmaster Nikola Jukic, 2521 grandmaster. So white to play here increases his advantage to a winning advantage really, but there's a key move in this position which those following the channel would know from an earlier video today, which was this position. I had shown this position earlier today. So what would you play here with white? Any ideas? Anyone? Okay, so white's play. I think I've given 20 seconds, yeah. White to play. What would you play as white? Yeah, okay, so this move c5 kind of emphasizes this b pawn. So takes b5, so this big passed b pawn. Knight ed7, b6, queen f4. Check. Coming to the rescue. Protecting f2. That's taken. And now we've got this b pawn menace. Rook d4, trying to swing around to b4. Rook d1, even stronger than rook a1. Multiple threats. g5 is one of them to knock out. Protection of d7. Knight e5, bishop drops back. Knight fd7, knight c2, looking at the rook. And white wants to play f4. To dismantle black. So here, if rook b2, f4 is strong, very strong. So black keeps an eye on f4 with rook f4. Rook d5. First thing takes for queening, if that takes. f6. Rook takes c5. And here, after this, black resigned. And yeah, someone on one of the chess websites said, I think they must be following engine evaluations, as though, yeah, black plays e5, and what is Magnus Carlsen doing, allowing e5? Funny enough, though, e5, if we look at e5, it did actually weaken this f5 square. So it doesn't matter what engines tell us. There's a downside which we as humans can see, and it's that f5 square. Now, Magnus Carlsen is human, and he creates a plan which was initially around f5. If we look at this f5 square, look at this. He went slowly round for f5. Here. Black couldn't play g6 because of queen takes f6. So he got his advantage there with that knight. Coming round here now. Yeah, I think it was just showing how to increase advantages. I mean, this position is very, very unpleasant now, it seems, for black. Already, this particular position here. The engine suggested actually rook b8. But knight d5 now, white's doing quite well. I think this, white would still have an advantage in this position. It's just quite interesting how black was outplayed there. But e5 isn't the end of the world for white playing for a win. Just because black gets in this e5, it doesn't seem to be the end of the world necessarily. Although it helps the pieces a bit. Okay. So one last game I was planning to show was another Magnus Carlsen game from today, which was really quite interesting. So Carlsen against a 27-3-5, Randislaw, I'm going to butcher the name, I'm sorry. Wojciech? I don't know. Magnus Carlsen against Wojciech. W-O-J-T-A-S-Z-E-K. So anyway, so e4, c5. Magnus plays actually knight c3 Sicilian. Closed Sicilian. And very, very interesting actually. Bishop e3, e5. And we get this weird looking move now. I'm just going to check live book. It's not that much played before. Usually players with white play queen d2 here, or knight here, or f4. And this is quite a rare bird, knight h3. So knight h3. Isn't that interesting? And the game continued like this. So f4, both sides castle, queen d2. It's good white is covering the f3 square at the moment, because this potentially is embarrassing, you know, if the rook moved. Just to show that. Just to show a silly move. Look, white plays knight d1. If he plays rook e1, end of game, bishop takes h3, because we've got this fork. So we've got to be careful in this position. So knight d1. Apparently black is okay here technically. Queen c8. The other one comes to protect it. So an odd configuration from Magnus, but he is ready to kick this knight. Knight goes back voluntarily. c3, b5, and white all of a sudden, the engines actually like white here in this position. So f takes e5 was played. Now if d takes, I think we just take on c5 without any problem. So we have knight takes e5, and now bishop h6, challenging that bishop. Knight 7 to c6. Black is a bit weak on d5 here. Bishop takes, king takes, knight f4. It looks nice for knight here, potentially, visually. Queen d8. Rook a d1. So d4 is on the cards now to take away the perch for that knight. Rook c8. Queen e2. So there's no knight c4 maybe tempo. So d4 still looks to be on the cards. h5. Is that questionable? The engine actually suggests h5 is one of the better moves here. It reinforces that grip black has on the g4 square. White gets in the d4, c takes, and black uses that g4 square. That's kicked. Knight takes, queen takes. So here, this knight d5 looks very pleasant, actually. Knight d5. Knight e7. Now, a great little idea. A really cute maneuver, I've got to say. How does white intensify the pressure on f7? Can you see what Magnus played in this position? If I give you 20 seconds starting from now, what would you play as white here? I mean, it's quite cute. So if I give you a clue, that how would you put more pressure on f7? And I'll just go and cough for a minute. Okay, so white to play here. What would you play as white? Any ideas? No ideas. I've given you a clue, come on. It's not e5. No, it's just rook d3. It's a treble. It's trebling like this. we're threatening the knight takes h5 check, crashing through. So b4 rook f3. So we're threatening now knight takes h5 check to crash through. So queen e8, lending some support for f7. This is already pretty bad for black, this position. This position here is critical. Apparently king g8 might be okay. If knight takes, we can take that. We can play like this. Bishop e6 apparently. And this might be okay for black. Might just be okay. But that wasn't played. d5, there's queen b6. Okay, so that wasn't played. No, instead black played queen e8. And we have now g4, intensifying the pressure on the king side. H takes g, h takes g4. And now white threatens things like queen h4 and knight takes g6. It's pretty nasty stuff. Bishop b5, the rook moves, queen d8. Okay, so here queen h4 might be answerable in this particular position now with knight c6, looking at that queen, and d4. So Magnus plays g5 here, and this marks out key squares. If knight c6, knight d5 in this position is possible. It seems. If queen takes g5 here, rook g3, queen d8, and in this position apparently bishop f1 is good. Let's have a quick look at this. Bishop takes, rook takes. What is white actually threatening? Well, there's a lot of pressure on black, but so this seems quite good. So anyway, after g5, knight c6 wasn't played. Queen b6 was played. In fact, okay, so this is really quite dangerous now. Okay, so we see queen b6, bishop h3, looking at the rook. The rook moves, and actually a bone-crunching move that Tao would like here, Mikhail Tao would like in this position. Can you see what Magnus Carlsen played in this position? Really, the engine absolutely loves this move as well. So white's got fierce coordination on the F file. His centre's protected for the moment, but he needs a knockout blow. Can you see what he plays if I give you 20 seconds, starting from now? So white play. Can anyone spot this move? So this is hot off the press, this game, just from today. So black is a 2-7-3-5. So if you're playing white, how would you finish off your 2-7-3-5 opponent? That'd be good, wouldn't it? Being a 2-7-3-5. Yeah. Any ideas? So white's play. Have a guess. Alright, some of you have mentioned. Okay, one of you mentioned knight e6 and knight h5. Let's have a look at knight e6. Apparently this doesn't do much. Black just takes here and there's not much going on at all. there's nothing here, it seems. If rook f6, knight g8, there's nothing going on there. Knight h5, I don't think there's anything either here. G takes, let's say rook f6, knight g6, there's nothing going on there. Where there is something going on is on bishop e6. So putting pressure, looking at f7 under literal scrutiny, f7 is under great scrutiny now from this bishop. And white is actually threatening knight h5 check. Say black ignored that and played a5. Let's just say a5. Knight h5 check is a mate in 7. If takes, that's a mate in 4. And if king h8, this is a mate, carries on with a mate in 7, with knight f6 now, like this. Knight h5 check here. So I just wanted to make sure that you're aware now that in this position, after bishop e6, knight h5 is threatened. So if black didn't do anything about that, if he takes here, this is a mate in 4. Knight takes e6 check. If here, we can just play rook takes f8, queen takes f8, queen g7. Any variation there, the king steps on this file, it doesn't look as though that should do anything. We just take there still. So black actually tried this move, bishop e8. And here, Magnus plays knight d5, looking at the queen. If the queen, let's just say the queen moves here, then this apparently is a mate in 11, rook h3. White is threatening queen f6 check and mating here. And if takes here, knight f6, and this is mating like this. It's pretty bad. Blimey, strange stuff. Queen takes d6. Let's have a quick look at this. It all gets pretty soon. There's a lot of crushing implications here of this knight d5. In the game, simply knight takes d5 was played. After bishop takes d5, white still has this idea of rook h3 and queen f6, and black actually resigned here. So let's see now. Black resigned in this position. It seems f7 is controlled, I mean protected, but it's this rook h3 threat which seems deadly. So queen c7. Say black had played queen c7, rook h3, threatening queen f6. And what does black do? If queen e7, then there's queen h4. And you see the rooks are not helping h8 here. So that's the end of game. If rook g8, there's another idea. Apparently, this is quite clever stuff. Check here is apparently crushing. If takes, check, and then queen h6. And if king f8, queen h4 is murderous, because now e5 is threatened. I don't think the king can escape. If the king tries to escape, rook f1, and f7 is on the fire. If rook f8, queen f4, it's slaughter time. It's just not good enough, this defense stuff. So a bit of a profound game. If we just rewind back, so actually in the game, yeah, after bishop e6, bishop e8, knight d5, black actually, after knight takes d5, bishop takes d5, black resigned here. I mean, there's such a powerful bind actually on the dark squares in the h file. The rooks are not connected, but black felt convinced enough to resign. Yeah, so that's a bit tactically complex. Okay, so what can you say? You see, you know, black didn't play on to show to everyone how this game would finish. There's another example, rook d7. Show you rook h3 is again crushing. Rook g8. This is an engine line e5. This apparently is crushing. White's threatening this again. If king f8, rook h7. It just gets pretty bad. So black didn't want to see any of that, which is a shame, I guess. It's quite mysterious, isn't it? Bishop takes d5, black resigned. Okay, so until next week, I hope you got something from that. So comments or questions on YouTube. Okay, thanks very much.